Chief at Space News. Mr. Park, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Wendy Whitman-Kobe, professor from the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. Good to see you, Professor Whitman-Kobe.
Thanks for having me back.
Now, first question to our Mr. Park. Let's first talk about those satellites that have been either unsuccessfully separated nor communicated. Now, one of the 4 CubeSats called TASOR, developed by the Korea Astronomy and Space Science Institute, is assumed not to have separated properly from the launch vehicle, and that's according to Science Ministry data analysis today. Now, I understand the 4 CubeSats were supposed to fly together, with one missing for now. Can they do their job properly?
Yes, the Science Ministry confirmed yesterday the CubeSat TASOL was not deployed from the upper stage of the KSLV-2 rocket. KSLV is also known as a Nuri rocket. This means the satellite is still inside the upper stage that is orbiting the Earth. The satellite there has already missed an opportunity to get out to reach its intended orbit, and the upper stage is supposed to make a fiery re-entry into Earth's atmosphere in the future. That means the upper stage and the undeployed satellite will eventually burn up in Earth's atmosphere. It's not known yet when it would happen, but it's something that will happen sometime in the future. I asked a scientist involved in the SNIPE mission about any possible negative impact of the setback on the mission, and the scientist told me this issue theoretically may not affect the mission, but not 100% sure. So I think it remains to be seen how things will unfold.
Right, I see. We'll have to wait and see. Now, Professor Whitman-Kobe, the ministry is still attempting to make contact with one of the commercial CubeSats developed by private company Justech as well. Now, could you briefly tell us more about this too? And is there any possibility that we could get a signal in the near future?
It's always possible. This technology is extremely difficult to master. And so it's not surprising that you might have some problems out of the gate. It's rather common. But that's also one of the really nice things about smaller satellites, CubeSats in particular. Not only are they smaller, but they do tend to be cheaper to make. So if you do have these sorts of problems, it's a little bit easier for the commercial company to come back with a new one. It doesn't cost as much to replace a faulty satellite. Of course, they'll continue working through trying to contact the satellite, I'm sure, over the next couple of weeks. These things happen relatively frequently. We just saw a commercial lunar lander essentially crash into the moon because of a software glitch. We've seen glitches, technological and hardware and software on NASA and European Space Agency missions. So it's happens. They'll continue working the problem, and I'm sure they're hopeful that they'll make some contact with it soon.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Park, although 2 satellites were not completely successful, the other 6 have successfully reached the orbit. And among them, let's focus on the main payload, which is a second next-generation small satellite. Now that 2 have communication, as far as I know, has taken place several times, what is the satellite's mission and when will it start?
The next second is the main primary payload and is in good shape, as you said, and is orbiting the Earth at the altitude of 550 kilometers. There are 3 missions, basically, that the satellite is supposed to do in orbit. The first is in-orbit demonstration of a locally developed SAR radar. SAR is SAR. It's an acronym for Synthetic Aperture Radar. This system was developed by KAIST, it's an elite university in South Korea. The radar was designed to produce imagery with up to 5-meter resolution and a swath width of 40 kilometers. The resolution falls behind the world top level, which is about 50 centimeter per pixel resolution, or even higher, like 30 centimeter or 25 centimeter. But still, it's meaningful in that the South Korea has developed SAR technology on its own. SAR is a specialized form of remote sensing that has seen growing demand globally. since Russia's invasion of Ukraine because SAR satellite can capture images at night through cloud cover and rain, which are conditions that impair traditional optical satellites. This is why the system is increasingly considered a strategically important asset, particularly for national security. You may have seen satellite images of Russian tanks or soldiers moving in the dark toward the Ukraine border around the time when the war broke out. These photos were actually captured by SAR satellite operated by satellite companies like Maxar Technologies, Black Sky, or Spy Global. That's the first mission, and the other two missions are precise measurement of space radiation using a locally developed device called the LEO-DUS, and the validation of 4 locally developed equipment like thermal controller, X-band, power amplifier, GPS receiver, and solar panel. And normally it takes days or even weeks for a satellite to start doing its assigned mission. And I believe the next second is currently checking is everything from communication to power system health of its payload aboard. And when it's done, the satellite will start carrying out its mission as planned.
Right, I see. Very interesting. Now, Professor Whitman-Cope, let's talk about the significance of the successful launch of this commercial-grade satellite. Now, as our Mr. Park pointed out, it can strengthen our national security. Could you briefly tell us more on how this could boost the country's defense capability?
There is a very, very tight and long-standing relationship between space technology and national security. Since the very beginning, because of the national security capabilities that space gives us in terms of not just launch technology, but satellite and remote imagery, space has essentially been militarized in that it has been used for military purposes since the dawn of the space age. So it's not just launch technology's relationship to ballistic missile technology, but also the remote imaging. And of importance, especially during the Cold War and the space race between the USSR and the United States, remote satellite or remote sensing technology was really important, not necessarily in heightening the tension, but in reducing the tension, because it does give both sides a lot more information. They don't necessarily have to trust one another at what the other is saying. They can visually confirm it with their own satellite eyes, so to speak. So that, in that sense, this type of remote sensing imagery is really, really helpful. Obviously, there's always a concern in terms of launch technology, and because of its relationship to ballistic missile technology. And, speaking for myself here, that is one of the concerns that space policy researchers have looked at. And some authors, argue that has been one of the relationship between those technologies has been one of the reasons that the major superpowers have been reluctant in the past to allow launch technology to proliferate, because it can lead to ballistic missile development or even be a cover for ballistic missile development.
Right, interesting. So there is, it's interesting to hear that there is a close relationship between the space technology and the national security. Now, Mr. Park, the latest liftoff was also meaningful in that it was the first time a private company, the Hanwha Aerospace, participated in the launch operation. Now, we could say this is the first step for a public-private technology transfer. How is it going to continue, and why is such technology transfer so important?
Yes, Hanwha Aerospace was selected in December last year as South Korea's first beneficiary of the public to private rocket technology transfer. It was only 6 months ago, so Hanwha played a limited role in preparing for the latest launch of KLCB-2 rocket. But the next launch is scheduled for 2025, 2 years away. So there are 2 additional launches in 2026 and 27. So it's believed that the Hanwha's role in the KSLV-2 program will continue to expand over time. And this kind of a public to private tech transfer is important to effectively nurture private rocket company here in Korea. Developing a rocket from scratch is extremely challenging technologically and costs a lot. South Korea, for example, South Korea spent 2 trillion won on developing KSL-2, and it took 10 years. Another reason is because domestic demand for rocket service is quite limited. That means without such tech transfer and other assistances, no company would willingly come forward to develop a rocket. Although it's different in details, SpaceX in the US also got help from NASA in the past when it was developing a new spacecraft. Then some may have this question in mind. Is it really bad for the public sector to develop a rocket using its own rocket technology without getting help from the private sector? My answer is, of course, it's not bad. There are countries like Russia where public sectors drive for the development of a new rocket and their operation with the private sector playing a limited role. No problem with it, actually, but the domino, and this is the domino way of developing rocket for many years in the past. But there are also many advantages we can expect when giving the private sector a bigger room to play. The biggest one would be innovation. Private companies are supposed to operate in a competitive market environment, and this is for innovation and differentiation. And the need to attract customers drive them to continuously develop new technology. And look at the SpaceX. It developed partially reusable rocket into sweeping the global launch market, commanding nearly half of the global commercial launch service market. That's a great deal. Even NASA couldn't make it in the past. So how could it happen? Because it's innovation. Innovation is a key, and the South Korea hope this technology transfer to private sector would spur similar innovation on Korean soil.
Right, I see. Now I know why tech transfer is so important. Now, Professor Whitman-Kobe, let's move on to our future goals. There will be 3 more Nuri launches between 2025 and 2027. Now, how will they be different from the most recent launch, and what is the goal of these 3 planned launches?
Obviously, one of the biggest goals is just getting that experience, that repetition in getting a rocket ready for launch, in going through those launch procedures, and really understanding the operations of the rocket. Last night, at least over here in the United States, SpaceX had its 200th consecutive successful launch. They are still really exploring the envelope, so to speak, trying to push the boundaries and understand how the Falcon 9 really operates. So even after all that time, it takes, you continue exploring what the rocket is capable of. So one of the goals will have to be just understanding how the rocket behaves, how all of its component parts work together, what problems tend to be more normal, and how to solve those problems. So really one of those big goals is experience. Another one is demonstrating its continued reliability. One of the things that a commercial satellite provider is going to be looking for when deciding where to launch their satellite is this rocket not only cost effective for me, but is it reliable? So reliability, experience, and really sort of probably promoting a Korean domestic commercial satellite market and helping those technologies along, as your other commentator was saying, in terms of supporting innovation, technological transfer, and really building up that homegrown experience and expertise that is going to be so necessary as we move into more grand endeavors, particularly on the moon and beyond.
Right, I see. So there's much more to confirm and explore. All right, now, Mr. Park, moreover, the government is developing a next-generation launch vehicle aiming to send a landing module to the moon by 2032. Now, what specific goals are planned for, and why is it so important that we continue to do this moon exploration?
And South Korea is developing a next generation launch vehicle called KSLV-3. This is a two-stage expandable rocket and expected to make its debut in 2030. Its first stage will have a cluster of 5 100-ton thrust engines, and the upper stage with two 10-ton thrust engines. The two engines and the rocket hardware will be developed by the state-funded Korea Aerospace Research Institute, or KARI, in collaboration with the industry partner that will be selected by September. The KSLV-3 will be capable of delivering up to 10 tons of payload to low Earth orbit, which is between 400 to 2,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, and 3.7 ton to geostationary transfer orbit, which is 36,000 kilometers above, and 1.8 ton to lunar transfer orbit. South Korea plans to launch a domestically developed robotic lunar lander on KSLV-3 by 2032. And regarding the significance of the moon exploration, overall, the significance of moon exploration lies in potential to advance scientific knowledge, drive technological progress, and or pave the way for human space exploration and promote international collaboration. One thing regrettable is that for now, South Korea does not have a clear picture of what it will do on the moon. The only visible one is, as I just said, developing a robotic lunar lander, no more than that. That's the only things now we have a clear picture on lunar exploration project. And just going to the moon is just, now it's meaningless. In the past, it was meaningful because there at the time there was ideological library, but now it's meaningless. The government should have a clear and concrete picture of what it wants to do on the moon and why it should go to the moon and how.
Right, I see. Interesting. We would have to have a clear and concrete reason why we are doing the moon exploration. Now, Professor Whitman-Cope, tapping onto the space race now, the U.S. is aiming to put astronauts back on the lunar surface by the end of 2025. And in response, China has recently also unveiled its plan to do the same by 2030. Now, how is the current space race among the superpowers developing?
I think as your previous guest just said, the race to the moon is an interesting one in the sense that the United States has essentially been there, done that several decades ago now. So there is an argument that there is no space race because it's already been won, it's already over. But on the other hand, even in that very first space race, one of the big drivers, the reason for going to the moon, was not just the development of military technology or other scientific goals, but prestige. And for any country on the global stage, prestige and reputation for doing big things like going to the moon is a very important thing. So I think that is one of the things that we're seeing here in terms of driving this space race, if we want to call it that, between the United States and China. But also on the United States side, the United States is bringing along a lot of partners and allies through the Artemis Accords, a series of bilateral agreements between the United States and other countries, including South Korea, including Spain, which just signed on a few days ago, about rules of the road for how to operate on the moon and beginning to lay the framework for an understanding of how multiple countries can operate once we get there. Clearly, it's going to take some time for countries other than the United States or even China, if either of us do succeed in their goals, to get to the moon and have this bigger play. But I think that's probably one of the biggest drivers here in terms of this newer space race is, can we continue doing these big things? Are these countries at the forefront? And that's one of the things that can bring allies and partners over to one side or the other, is doing these big things. So, obviously there are economic reasons for developing these technologies. You can have tons of economic spin-offs, as we did with the Apollo program, scientific exploration and new discoveries, as well as development of new technologies. So there's a lot of reasons, but I think prestige is probably the biggest one driving this new race to the moon.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Park, since our Professor Women-Koop brought up the matter of the space cooperation, I'd like to ask you this as a last question. Now, South Korea already signed the Artemis Accords with the U.S., like our professor said, and further agreed to boost space cooperation during President Yoon's safe visit to Washington this year. Now, in what ways could both sides benefit each other in terms of securing superiority in the space race?
And I think that what's needed is a win-win format. I mean, it's critical to make a bilateral cooperation sustainable and resilient. Currently, America's space development is in sync with the broader national strategy aimed at countering China. And one thing you need to know is that the Artemis Accord and Artemis Lunar Exploration Program are not free from U.S. politics. Everything America currently does regarding outer space include political consideration, particularly about China. So in order to keep the bilateral cooperation sustainable and resilient, I think South Korea will have to think about how it can support that goal of the U.S. And it will put South Korea in a better position to ask the U.S. something that can contribute to South Korea's own space development. It could be America's contribution to commercialization of Korea's space sector, or it could be, easing of political restriction imposed on space-related product, and it could be others. But the one important thing is we need to we want to know what U.S. want from us, and then we can ask the U.S. what we want and what we want to get from you.
Right, I see. Now, as much as I'm enjoying this space talk, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Now, thank you, Mr. Park and Professor Women-Koop, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's my honor, my pleasure. Thank you.